Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajjanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajjanaranjana Brajjanaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Pariviragacharya Astatara Satasti Srimad is Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi Okay, there's the meter. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 38 from Canto 10, Chapter 10. Vani Gonanu Katane Shavanau Katayam Hastau Chakarma Sukamanas Padayorna Smrityam Shiras Nivasa Jagat Praname Drishti Satam Darshanestu Bhavatanunam Vani Gunanu Katane Shavanau Katayam Hastau Chakarma Sumanastava Padayorna Shrityam Smrityam Shirastava Nivasa Jagat Praname Drishti Satam Darshanestu Bhavat Tu Tanunam. C'est bon. Vani gananu katane shravanau katayam. Hastau chakarma sumanas tava padayorna. Smrityam shiras tava nivasa jagat praname. Drishti satam darshanestu bhavatranonam. Vani Hastau chakarma surmanas tava padayorna. Smrityam shiras tava nivasa jagat praname. Drishti satam darshanestu bhavat pranonam. Vani gunanu katane shravanau katayam. Hastau chakarma sumanas tava padayorno. Smrityam shiras tava nivasa jagat praname. Vani katane shravanau katayam. Vani, words, the power of speech. Guna anukatane, always engaged in talking about your pastimes. Shravanau, the ear, or oral reception. Katayam, and talks about you and your pastimes. Hastau, hands and legs, and other senses. Cha, also. Karmasu, engaging them in executing your mission. Manaha, the mind. Tava, your. Padayoho, of your lotus feet. Naha, our. Smrityam, in remembrance. Always engaged in meditation. Shiraha, the head. Tava, your. Nivasa jagat praname, because you are all-pervading. You are everything. And our heads should bow down, not looking for enjoyment. Drishtihi, the power of sight. Satam, of the Vaishnavas. Darshane, in seeing. astu. Let them be engaged in this way. Bhavat tanunam, who are non-different from you. Translation. Henceforward, may all our words describe your pastimes. May our ears engage in oral reception of your glories. May our hands, legs, and other senses engage in actions pleasing to you. And may our minds always think of your lotus feet. May our heads offer obeisances to everything within this world, because all things are also your different forms. And may our eyes see the forms of Vaishnavas who are non-different from you. Purport. Here the process of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead is given. This process is bhakti. Shravanam kirtanam Vishnu, smaranam padasevanam, archanam bandhanam dasyam, sakyam atmanivedanam. Everything should be engaged in the service of the Lord. Rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhaktir uchate. Everything, the mind, the body, and all the sense organs should be engaged in Krishna's service. This is to be learned from expert devotees like Narada Swayambhu and Shambhu. This is the process. We cannot manufacture our own way of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for it is not that everything one manufactures or concocts will lead to understanding God. Such a proposition, yata mata tata pata, is foolish. I'm used to hearing it, yata mata topat, but here it is in Sanskrit. Krishna says, Bhaktyaham ekaya grayam. Only by executing the activities of bhakti can one understand me. It's Lord Brahma's prayers. No, excuse me, 11:14:21. Krishna to Uddhava. This is called anukulyena krishnanushilanam, remaining engaged favorably in the service of the Lord. This is the parting words or last reference given in this section of Nala Kuvera and Manigriva before they depart back for the abode of Kuvera. And when I first read this verse, and I was surprised, it's so similar to one of Prabhupada's favorite verses in the Bhagavatam, Savaimana Krishna Padara Vindayo, the process that Maharaj Ambarish engaged in, starting with the mind, but then all of the senses being engaged in service, the hands, the legs, the feet, the eyes, the limbs, everything engaged in service to the Supreme Lord. So that's the bhakti process that Maharaj Ambarish followed, and quite similar as the bhakti process being advocated by, or the appeal is, please engage us in these ways. And then appropriately Prabhupada, instead of quoting this description of Maharaj Ambarish's activities, he just says this is a description of the bhakti process. And the bhakti process is recognizing everything has a source, sambandha. That source is Krishna. And since everything has its connection with the source, one should use everything in the service of the source. And so we have part of that everything is our senses, our limbs, our abilities, our whatever we have, we use that in service. And then there's objects, and that's to be used in Krishna's service. And there's a mentality behind, it's not just behavior, the mentality behind it is for pleasing Krishna. I'm going to read the commentaries of Jiva Goswami and also Vishwanath, because it's specific. Jiva Goswami says it's not just the senses are engaged in those activities, but it's with the purpose of pleasing Krishna, it's with devotion. Because it's through devotion, which is purpose as well as activity. It's not purpose only or activity only, but it's both. It's what we do, and it's the consciousness behind what we do. Like, for example, deity worship. So part of deity worship, it's very simple. Example, part of deity worship is we blow a conch, or we ring a bell and make circles with some incense. So somebody can do that, and their thoughts are in the gutter. It happens, even in deity worship, or other places. So it's not the behavior per se. Behavior is not to be neglected, but it's the consciousness behind the behavior that's an essential part of devotion. And therefore, Prabhupada makes reference to this anukulyena Krishna anushilanam. So if you remember from the weekend, Jiva Goswami's explanation, his commentary of this important foundational verse of what bhakti is, says the root of anushilana says there's active and there's not active. The not active is absorption in contemplation with devotion. The devotion, absorption is pleasing Krishna. And the mind, thus absorbed, doesn't move while the bell is being rung and the incense is being moved, or whatever else we may do. Clean the floor of the temple, mandir marjanado. That's a behavior. And the spiritual master is pleased. We sing every morning. When the spiritual master sees one is cleansing the temple. And the teaching is when you cleanse the temple, you're cleansing your heart. And the effectiveness of that cleansing of the heart has a lot to do with the consciousness behind the cleansing. Like a super example is Dukhi Krishna. Amongst the followers of Lord Chaitanya, Dukhi Krishna became Shyamananda because Dukhi Krishna wanted some service. Jiva Goswami gave him some service. Near the Radha Damodar temple, there's this little place where Radha and Krishna come every evening and they engage in sporting activities, rasa dance. So we hear those things. So he was given the service of making it clean by Jiva Goswami, and his devotion was so absorbed in pleasing Radha and Krishna that there was some devotional reciprocation. It's not just, so we may do some cleaning, or we may do some deity worship, Or we may do some kirtan, or we may do whatever we do, cooking or preaching or something, book distribution or whatever our services are. We may do those things in more or less devotional consciousness. And so the behavior is not to be neglected, but the purpose behind the behavior is not to be neglected. That's the bhakti, that's a essential element of the bhakti life or bhakti principle. Now supposing there are people out there that don't know about Krishna, the Supreme Person, and He's meant to be pleased. There's a whole organization called Bhakti Life. And they don't, it's heavily influenced by impersonalism because they don't know. But they like kirtan, and they like lots of things that are behaviors that devotees do, but they don't connect with Krishna. It's not for the pleasure of Krishna. They feel something, and they like the feeling, and so they do. But it's a whole other experience, and it's a whole other experience for Krishna, that if we do for the pleasure of Krishna. And those who do for the pleasure of Krishna, not only they receive, but others also receive because they receive. Like kirtan performers that not just like the musicality of kirtan, but the devotion of kirtan. That there's a spiritual effectiveness that goes way beyond musicality. Or there are devotees that are simply dedicated to serve the deity. And when that devotion is engaged in worship of the deity, not only that person, the pujari, gets reciprocation from the deity, but the whole devotional community gets spiritual benefit because of that elevated standard of wanting to please Krishna. Same with cooking, same with everything. Cleaning, preaching, whatever it is. Dancing, managing. It's the for the pleasure of Krishna principle. The behavior is certainly important, and the consciousness behind the behavior is certainly important. So they're asking, I'll read what Jiva Goswami writes, it's really nice. Jiva Goswami explains, this is their parting words. So as they're parting, they've made a request to go back to their position as the sons of Kuvera. That's their request. And computer's not responding. Well, maybe I won't read it. It's a new computer too. It's supposed to be like Spiffo, and it's not responding. Oh, Krishna. Well, I'll do my best to remember. Jiva Goswami says, Krishna's words, Krishna's message to these two men, sons of Kuvera, because Narada helped you become devotees, then just go to Narada. And then they respond by saying that if we're engaged in devotional service, we're connected with Narada and we're connected with you. So please give your mercy in the form of the ways of devotional service. and then they itemize the parts, what the eyes do. Same as what Canto 2, those chapters, chapter 2, I believe, where it speaks of the legs that don't go to the temple are like tree trunks, the eyes that don't see the form of the Lord, they're like the plumes of a peacock feather, and so forth. The limbs are meant to be engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. Well, I know why. It's requiring Wi-Fi, that's why it won't move. Okay, nothing wrong with the computer. Oh, there we go. Okay. Krishna speaking to the two brothers. Since Narada made you devotees, go to him. And their response, then give us all the methods of bhakti. They pray in this way, which is the nature of bhakti. May our words or voice speak continuously of the glories of your feet, of your affection for your devotees, and of your beauty. Not about yoga or sacrifices. May our minds be thinking of your feet with devotion, not just thinking. There's the bhakti element, not just the behavior, even the behavior of the mind. The contemplation with devotion, Krishna should be pleased. May our two ears be engaged in hearing topics about you with full attention, and for you fully. Let us hear all topics, including how you enable Brahma to carry out creation, since the ears are not completely independent of what they hear. At least in speaking, we should speak only about the sweet qualities of the Lord because of their rasa. The hands and other organs should be engaged in actions like deity worship and related services. The head should offer respects to you, O dweller in the universe. This word head, shiras, is mentioned last, since this is the main limb of the body. The Lord, offering respects to the Lord indicates respects are to be offered to the world, since the Lord is everything, and thus perfection in offering respects is achieved. Because that's right in the translation that Prabhupada gave. It's offering respects to all moving, non-moving objects. It's not just to the spiritual potency within life forms. That's a spiritual offering of respect. But even, chunks of matter in different shapes and forms and purposes, recognizing this is of the Supreme Lord and therefore to be offered respects, and specifically also to the devotees, because if the features of this world are worthy of our respect, then what to speak of the great devotees worthy of our respect? Prayers, often, including here, they're different personal and creative ways of expressing fundamental teachings. Fundamental teachings include Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana, and so we've gotten this display. Here specifically they're speaking of Abhideya, the process of bhakti, with acknowledgement from the previous verse of the source of everything that exists. So how to engage in the source of everything that exists. How do we act in our relationship with Krishna? And the fruit of that, they're seeking blessings as well, that they can stay fixed in this mood of wanting to please the Supreme Lord. And as that matures, that's prema. There, Jiva Goswami also speaks, let us offer our respects to the residents of Braja, along with Narada and great personalities. These are the superlative of all personalities, the residents of Vrindavan. And let us offer our respects to them. And the sweet exchanges that take place between you and them. Let us bow our heads before them. No chess game this morning. What happened? Huh? They did it already? They finished? Okay. Okay, so any discussion? Yes. Madhavacharan, raise your hand. Thanks.
Direct devotional service, like, offering the artik on the altar, or like going out for sankirtan. But how do we incorporate Krishna consciousness in our work life, or like
in a work life?
Work life, or even like, for
do it for Krishna. Same principle. If you exercise yourself in the direct connection with Krishna activities, hearing, chanting, remembering, worshipping, praying, that consciousness awakens through the direct activities and it carries over to the other activities. That is to say, you're doing this for Krishna. Otherwise, we have what's known in the Christian world as a secular religion. But secular means this is what I do for God, and over here is what I do for this that's worldly. That's secularism. And then there's separation of church and state. That's a secular government. Or secular life is, I go to the church or mosque or place of worship, temple, and that's my devotion to God. Because God's in the temple, or God's in the church, or godliness is there. So I go and then over there is my worldly life. So to spiritualize our worldly life, to do our career activities and family duties and everything else, civic duties, for Krishna, it springs from how we engage in our devotional activities. Consciousness carries over. No, it's an art, art of work, art of living. It's a life of devotion, including everything, no exception. How to do starts with proper hearing and chanting, and worshipping and everything. For the non-devotee, there is this popular saying, in India at least, work is worship. But so it's not that for us as devotees, work is not worship, but it's the consciousness behind the activity. It's not, I'm devoted to my family and so I work and that's my worship. It's quite incomplete. misguided. Because the consciousness behind is not right. You know, material becomes spiritual just because I say so. It's the consciousness behind it.
I have one more question, Guru.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that our aim is to please Krishna. So how do we know that Krishna is pleased?
He smiles. We know through Guru Sadhu Shastra. How do we know anything? What to speak of transcendental things? Guru Sadhu Shastra. Then there's a subjective experience. That's detachment. Viraktir anyatra cha. And I have my desire to be engaged in service to Krishna is getting stronger. And thereby the detachment for other things is fading. I may still be engaging in the same objects, but the desire to be the enjoyer of those objects fades. And the desire to do this activity, engaging with these objects, is with devotion. Because you like kirtan, there's a perfect, for example. You know, our younger generation devotees, for example, really like kirtan. How much contemplation is there that pleasing Krishna is the purpose of it? You know, it's the beginning that they like. So anyway, music is part of life. People like music, according to the modes of nature. And we may have a particular mode and think this is good happiness. Anyway.
Thank you.
That we want to please Krishna through this activity, and the detachment for the other kind of engaging in the objects while doing that activity, or in general, just losing interest in, as Prabhupada would say, cinema and stuff, worldly stuff. That's a sign that you're pleasing Krishna. You have something.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So, Prabhupada in one of the lectures says...
Speak slowly. Prabhupada what?
In one of the lecture, he says, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. So, for the devotees like me who is working in a job or something,
yeah,
how can we apply that exactly?
Daily. Nityam literally means always. Prabhupada is very generous and says daily.
Okay. So, Sevaya means reading?
Yeah, and hearing. Shravanam, Kirtanam. Hearing and chanting. It includes reading, because it's recorded Kirtanam, transcribed now in a book form, and then you read it. You can say it out loud or say it in your mind, or just read it, with your eyes. But you know, it's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Nityam.
Thank you.
Sival.
Guru Maharaj, we follow the examples of these great personalities in the Bhagavatam as they express their devotion and their absorption, their prayers to Krishna, and obviously, you know, persons like me are not there, but you make the endeavor, you follow, you pray for these things, you pray for service, you pray for, like you read this weekend, some beautiful prayers about protect me from false ego.
Consolidate, make it shorter.
Okay. You get reciprocations for the deities as you endeavor, you know, your best.
Attraction, yeah.
Yes, and sometimes the confusing part is that there is positive signs and there is also negative signs or there is, they go ahead and then don't go. And when you're in those situations in which there is these reciprocations that, it may be confusing. Sometimes it's just like pole opposite. How do you deal with these things?
Easy. You nurture the unchanging. And then because outside is changing, it's the mind and the unsteadiness due to the mind that's not steady, due to affinity for the temporary. So when there's faith and confidence, conviction in the unchanging, that is, I have an eternal relationship with Krishna and he can do with me whatever he likes. The bottom of the iceberg. Deeply held convictions. And then what's going on up here with the mind, sometimes and sometimes. That the feeling disconnected, that's the mind. It's not the soul. It's a feeling. And Krishna's not making us feel disconnected. It's just part of our conditioning. The mind goes over there. Now for transcendentalists, let's just, speak about the gopis. Sometimes they feel separation. That's a different feeling. It's attachment diversity. Ours is not attachment. Ours is Maya. So sometimes the influence of Maya upon us is stronger than others. What do you do when the influence of Maya is stronger? Or what do you do when you feel totally connected? It nourishes your faith. So that when those other periods of time when it's down, that's reality. And the mind isn't reality. That's what you do. You don't identify with the mind and its oscillating conditions. You identify with who you are. That's not changing. You don't shut the mind off. You just don't place so much value in it. It doesn't take us to Krishna on its own. It's a very, not a pleasant master. So we don't make the mind our master. We serve Krishna. That's unchanging. Okay.
Just to clarify, if I may, how do you recognize?
How do you recognize?
How do you recognize that you're being, victimized by the mind and you're getting,
and just
deviate?
live life, and we're victimized by the mind. Be observant. I mean, part of the preamble of your question is there's very elevated devotees and then there's us. So we can see from the example of very elevated devotees what's it like. We're not there. And so when we experience, hold it up to the light of Guru Sadhu Shastra. We're not there. You remember Nityananda Pran's question about, there's very elevated and I'm not so elevated, so what are some teachings that help me in this, lower stage? Because that's so elevated. Well, we have examples of persons that became elevated by the bhakti process. They were like us, and they went. So that gives some indication of how you deal with, and your question specifically is, how do you recognize? You just, by default, that's where we are. I'm not a pure devotee. Which means identify with the mind. And the mind is tricky. So it starts with knowledge, but strengthening that knowledge, or really the basis of knowledge, is bhakti. My life is meant to please Krishna, not this other. And so is this other going to take me closer to pleasing and serving Krishna? No. And so that's the test. Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam, or Anyanyabilash Drishanyam, excuse me. The first two limbs of surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjanam. Accept things favorable. So if it's not favorable, it's not going to lead me to Krishna. Full stop. And we may not be so advanced, or maybe we can't find the brake pedal. But that's the principle. If it's going to take me to Krishna, that's good. Even I may feel uncomfortable going through it. If it's going to take me to Krishna, it's good. Okay. Someone else? Shri Radhika?
Guru Maharaj, I wanted to link one of the themes from Vyasa Puja to a message from this morning. So you were speaking about service to the holy name, and it seems to me that begins with being present with the holy name.
It's like being present. It's more than being present.
Yes, but for me, the first step is even just hearing. So, I feel like for me, service to the name begins with actually being present with what I'm doing. And this morning's message, when you were reading from Srila Jiva Goswami's commentary, you were speaking of, even at the level of the mind, not just a behavior,
yes,
but adding the bhakti element of pleasing to Krishna.
Yes.
So for me, even just being present with the holy name is it's a gigantic effort, and it's very mechanical.
I got it. My experience is presence is as a subset. It's included. When you have $1 million, you have $10. When you're a pauper, $10 is a lot, or $100, or $1,000. When you have $1 million and you have lots of thousands for a pauper. So the bhakti, the serving the name, cultivating that, a subset is you're present. You're with your master. And in that section, it's two things. The name and the person named are the same. How do you realize that? Well, the Bhakti Siddhanta explains, the mind cannot realize it. Bhakti permits one to realize. You go beyond the mind. And beyond the mind is service. Service doesn't depend on what the mind says. If your mood of service is not strong, what the mind says rules. I'm angry. Look out, I'm angry. I can't control my anger because I'm angry. But if someone is in the mood of serving, then they can control the lower urges, lust, anger, greed, etc. One can control them. And so back to your, the being present. It's a struggle. That doesn't mean we don't engage in the struggle, but the struggle becomes facilitated by this submission in the mood of service. Mam eva ye prapadyante. So what is prapadyante? Surrender. He's the master. I'm the servant. It's included. Mood of service. So, you're serving your children. You love serving your children. And to bring it to the point where whatever are the things that are not wanted from you to them, it's taken care of by the mood of service to the name. Then it perfects all the shortcomings that we have. And there's a few of them we have, each one of us. So that's where it starts. And then, like this other question, Madhavacharan's question about work. How do I be Krishna conscious in the workplace? It starts with the name. That's where it starts. And of course, the Bhagavatam, the emphasis was specific to the name, but it's the same with the Bhagavatam. Our reading can be, I find that interesting, or our curiosity, or the intellectualism thing within us, that how does this fit together with that? Not so much like, I want to get closer to Krishna, I just want to understand interesting things. I have that curiosity side to me, and I like to understand. But the purpose is the devotional purpose is, I want to get closer to this shelter of the feet of Krishna in the mood of serving him with love. So then you're present with the hearing process, the chanting process, the worship process. Start with hearing and chanting properly. Okay. And one more question. You have your hand up, right?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for your class. You were mentioning those series of verses from the second canto, chapter 3.
Yes.
And one of them is related to this verse. I think the verse says, if you have a turban or crown on, but don't bow down, something to that extent.
Yes, something like that.
This verse also mentions about bow down.
Yes, it does.
I'm just sharing what Prabhupada said in one lecture recently regarding bowing down. He used that word many times. This lecture is from Seattle.
Seattle.
When he was in Seattle, September 30th, 1968.
68?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And at the end of that lecture, Prabhupada was explaining to one student.
He was doing what?
Explaining to one student of basically how we're all, because sometimes the topic is, when we come to a spiritual process, many people say, I don't want to bow down to...
Many people do what?
They say, I don't want to bow down.
I don't want to bow down.
To personalities.
Yeah, right.
And so Prabhupada made a very profound point.
He said, at the end of life, you'll bow down.
Basically, he says actually that we're actually forced to bow down to everything at every moment. We're forced to bow down to death, to disease, to lust. He was like, the bowing down must continue. Yes. So who should we find out who we should bow down to? And so my question is that it may be easy, especially when we come to Krishna consciousness, to bow down to a spiritual master, but it's hard to bow down to forgiveness with other Vaishnavas. We would rather bow down to holding on to grudges. So my question is that...
Sounds like a class, not a question.
Well, my question is that what are some steps we can move forward? Because it seems like, this is the same mood that comes up between devotees so many years, is that...
How do we overcome the obstacle of not wanting to pay obeisances to devotees? That's your question?
And realize that we're actually bowing down
Realize the what?
And gain the realization like Prabhupada that we're actually bowing down to the modes of material nature, holding on to grudges, the mode of ignorance.
Well, you're giving a class. How do you realize the words of the pure devotee? By hearing them and letting them enter your heart. But if the heart's closed, they won't enter. So you have to open your heart to the word, to the spiritual master, particularly our founder Acharya, because he's a perfected being. And if our heart's not open to a perfected being, you know, we're a hard nut. We're going to stay hard-hearted. So that's, you know, the steel-framed heart. And that's due to offenses, starting with our offense to the representatives of disciplic succession, prominent for all of us in ISKCON, our founder Acharya. So how do we overcome that hard-heartedness? Continue to hear with some degree of faith. Even if there isn't faith, Prabhupada's words are, auspiciousness is created by the sound. So go on hearing, even if it's, I don't want to bow down kind of hearing. Or, you know, so I'll bow down to lust and death, but I won't bow down to the spiritual master. So just go on hearing anyways, with faith that this will purify me. That's a mode of goodness principle. Okay. So those of you that are departing, you're right behind all the others. Thank you for coming and having joined us. Safe travels back. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.